economics of mutuality is fantastic, and we expressed that we want to share this with other businesses. So my first question is, how do we do that? We then also heard from Bruno that we wanted to share that with other kinds of organisations, governments, for instance. And that becomes a bit challenging, because in the same way that we've maximised financial capital, political parties try and maximise social capital in the hope that that will become votes. So my question is as we look to take the economics of mutuality and the longer term vision for that to go to politicians, what's the right number of votes?
Very happy to handle maybe the first question with a bit more certainty than the second question, if you don't mind. Well, actually, when we started this journey 10 years ago, we did not realize at all that it would become something so transformational, not only for business, but for society at large. And it's very important to, I say that to everybody I work with, it's important to keep the feet on the ground and the head in the sky. Okay? It's a bit like the finite and infinite. And it's important to realize that, I will use an analogy here. There is a story of the king of France. I'm French, I'll give you a French example. He was visiting the construction of Notre Dame in Paris. And there was a group of people working on the building of the cathedral. And he was asking the first person, said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm building a wall." Right? And that was right. He was building a wall. And then he was asking a second person, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm building a cathedral." And they were doing the same job, but one had the idea of that he was just building, putting stones over stones. The other one had the vision that he was building something much bigger. And I think this is what I would like to share with you. We can all start with where we are, but don't lose sight of what you are part of. And I think it's also what defines human beings. Now, what it means for how we share this with others. And as we were moving forward and we discovered the first breakthrough that it's possible to measure social, human, natural capital. It's possible that actually when you invest in your social, human, natural capital, you actually build a better business. It's actually possible to fix problems in your ecosystem, not through charity or CSR programs, but through well-designed business model. It's actually good for your business to have a purpose. So all of this can actually natural laws that actually we forgot or we underestimated, which are part of the way we do business. Because business existed before capitalism and will exist after capitalism. It's deeply ingrained in the way we do business. So in a sense, in the economics of mutuality, we don't have any pride at all. We are not inventing anything. We're just maybe more acute observers of natural laws. But what it means for the others, because you know we live in a very competitive business and we don't like to give up our competitive advantage. And we had a discussion several years ago, and we introduced this concept of non-rival good, which actually is part of the knowledge economy very much. It's that a non-rival good is something that gains value when you share it. Like for instance, a car, for instance, is typically a rival good. If someone else has a car, it's not good for you. Actually, it intends to diminish the economic value of your own car. But a mobile phone, for instance, okay? Everyone someone else buys a phone in the world, it increases the value of your own phone because you can reach him. So there is in economics this concept of rival good and non-rival good. And we came to the conclusion that mutuality and economics of mutuality is typically a non-rival good, that it would gain value when we share it. So this is a fundamental philosophical principle behind it. And we actually are bringing this to life now. And I didn't want to share it with you because I was limited with the number of slides, but there is this incredible vision of Mars. The family and also the management team say, well, we're going to turn Catalyst and economics of mutuality into a foundation, into a non-profit organization in order to share this idea with the rest of the world, with other businesses, with other organizations, with other government. And not only because we just want to be good or just to feel good about it, but because it's a good thing for the business. We will learn much more by sharing what we have because we can get something bigger in return. So we are actually very busy in setting this up it will be the first time actually that Mars is actually giving up this entire intellectual property to the rest of the world in return of actually of not only making the world a better place, but also for Mars to become the first beneficiary of this. So it's happening as we speak, and we already have a long list of organizations that want to partner with us. And at some stage, we will become a true catalyst. You know, a catalyst is meant to disappear in the chemical reaction without being changed himself. So the best thing that could happen to this project is that everybody takes it for himself and makes him actually a reality for his business, and that we disappear and they forget who we are. This is the real vision we have behind economics of mutuality. Now, the second point is about the organization of society, which essentially is the purpose of politics. And it's very interesting that you raise this question now, because when we launched this vision of EOM 10 years ago, we invited someone called Philip Gould, who is English. Maybe some of you have heard him. He was a spin doctor of Philip Gould, of Tony Blair, and he passed away a few years ago. And he gave a wonderful speech at the time, almost a prophetic speech, in 2008. And he said, well, at some stage, the economics of mutuality will become the politics of mutuality, because essentially it will be up to the government to understand actually the role that they have as government to create the institutions that would be conducive to the emergence of mutuality. It said this is what the New Labour was designed to do, and they failed miserably for a number of things. So he was teaching actually all the reasons why the New Labour failed at promoting mutuality in the political debate. So in a sense, this is my response to you. The last question is about what is the right level of votes for a company. So for a political party, being European and being in England today of a heated debate on Brexit, I would be tempted to say that. Vox Dei, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which means the voice of the people, is a voice of God. And in a sense, maybe democracy is not the most appropriate system, but it is still probably the least bad system. So I think we should, I really believe in the wisdom of crowd and the let people vote. So the maximum people you can get behind your cause is probably a good sign that you are in the right direction, but it's not necessarily always the case.
Okay, does that answer your question, Alistair? Excellent. So does anyone else in the room have any questions, or online on the broadcast? Mr. Stebbings at the back.
Don't hurt me with that. So my question is, I've seen Mars's core business do a number of things, and things like the $1 billion investment in sustainability. I don't know how much of that was linked or driven by the economics of mutuality, but what is Mars as a core business planning to do over the next few years? And I know there's an encouragement for each of us to do our own small piece of the pie, but my proposition is Grant Reid can probably have a bigger impact. So what are we planning to do?
Yeah, happy to answer this question. I think the economics of mutuality was not designed to be a sustainability program. It was meant to be a management innovation, which of course has impact on sustainability issues. But it was not meant to be a sustainability program. So the two initiatives actually are running in parallel, and every so often they connect. But there are two parallel initiatives. In a sense, the purpose of economics of mutuality is to change the modes of profit construction. It's to respond to the question, what should be the right level of profit? And after 10 years of research, we know now how to design the right level of profit. And what we call the mutual profit is not is a single bottom line, which is slightly different than the financial profit. And if your mutual profit is higher than your financial profit, it means that your business is really mutual. And if your mutual profit is lower than your financial profit, it means actually you are stealing something from your ecosystem. The problem today is that we don't know this But once you know this, you know whether you are mutual or responsible or whether you are not. And what we are proposing is we now have 9 case studies around the world at different levels of the organizations, but across all the segments. And we believe it's actually this way that the business leaders at the level of a business unit or a region, which actually will make that experiment of that managing their business through a mutual profit is not only good for a sustainability program, but also good for their own business. And the ultimate step, which I think will happen at some stage, is when bonus, your AVP, your MPI, your MSOP, the capital appropriation budget will not be based on financial KPI, but on mutual KPI. Because that's the way you would actually bring aligned purpose and practice. And because today we have a growing gap between our purpose and our practice. And it's a global phenomenon, to the extent actually that a friend of mine who is a corporate affairs guy in McLean is developing this concept of sustainability Ponzi scheme. He said that every company actually makes like a big statement, but they can't deliver it. So they make an even bigger statement, but they can't deliver it. So they make an even bigger statement, and they can't deliver it. And they try to hide the previous big statement by making an even bigger statement. We are not in this game at Mars because we are not driven by corporate reputation, but it's still something that actually is affecting the whole business. And the result of this is the level of trust that we have in our business leaders. And it's not sustainable. So my view is that actually things go, you see, in steps. We started with charity program. So I make money one way, and I give money the other way. This is the Bill Gates model, right? There is then we are now in the corporate social responsibility program, which is actually, okay, I want to bring, this is your 2 circles. We are going to bring corporate social responsibility back to business, but we are still doing this on the periphery of our business. We do it for cocoa farmers, we do it for stuff, it's at the periphery. The next stage of responsibility is when you bring together these 2 concepts, but it needs to be based on processes and tools and practices which actually are at the level not of corporate social responsibility or corporate affairs. It has to be done at the level of a GM and his chief financial officer. So this is a journey, and every journey goes through different stages. And I like to finish with one quote, which I already give very often to my team. It's a quote of a German philosopher called Schopenhauer, and he said that every truth goes through 4 stages. The first one, it is ignored. The second one, it is ridiculed. Third one, it is violently opposed. And 4th stage is accepted as self-evident. And with the economics of mutuality, we're holding something which is true, and we are somewhere on that journey, depending on who we talk to. And I will stop here, otherwise I would be politically incorrect.
And I guess a question from my perspective as well, where I've got the panel, and almost in terms of what Angela and how I kicked off the day today, in terms of how we could apply this as Mars Global Services, clearly we have the opportunity to work with many different areas of the business. We have quite a scale of influence in terms of helping them solve problems and think about how we could solve problems in different ways. What are a couple of the key things that we could do differently going forward to really think about having 5 principles in one hand, and in the other hand really starting to consider the economics of mutuality?
Let me answer that from kind of my perspective, without knowing loads about your part of the business. From a leadership perspective, I'd always say it starts with me. So one of the interesting moments around this work with taking leaders through this mutuality journey was to ask the question, how am I mutual as a leader? Because mutuality is about relationships. And it's about reciprocity. And so how do I work with my own conflicts around that? So in your part of the business, how do you relate to other parts of the business? What's the quality of those relationships? How mutual are they? What's the quality of the relationships with your suppliers and other stakeholders? I think it requires us to discover another level of consciousness around mutuality. So we've had the principle of mutuality for over 100 years in the business, But I think the invitation here and with this work is for us to consider that it now needs to be expressed further than maybe we've expressed it in the last 100 years. And that is a personal leadership journey as much as it is an organisational journey.
Maybe to build, I think a core part of it is just considering all the forms of capitals in any decision we make and anything we do. So Bruno had that nice slide with human capital, social capital, financial capital, and natural capital. And our system so far has mostly revolved around us considering financial capital in most businesses. I don't know about Mars and here, so I don't want to assume that. But traditionally, we consider financial capital as the most dominant in our decision making. So how can we begin to consider the holistic impact of everything we do, both on ourselves, our colleagues, you know, as Jane said, as well as society at large, and just having that more broad mindset, I think, in itself, in everything we do will help us really live this idea of mutuality in the business.
Very quickly, I mean, I think on a personal level, as I said in in the talk, was to establish some of your own personal sources of inspiration. You know, to take it to the personal level. Find the people that think differently to you. Find something to read or a blog or whatever it is that really gets you thinking differently. Because you know, we have a habit of thinking we found innovation or thinking that we're doing something different, but it's actually just new language for what we've always done. And actually, the best way to sense check that is to invite the outside in. So I think, and we can all do that on our own personal level, I think.
And I remember several years ago we did a cultural study of MGS, and it was MGS actually is the only unit within Mars which thinks MGS first and Mars second. And we were intrigued by this, and I think it has to do with identity of this unit, which actually is not a manufacturing unit; it's a service unit. So it's kind of an alien within the Mars tribe, and actually we feel the same at Catalyst sometimes. But I think in a sense you are also as a unit you are really on the edge of what can bring transformation to the business, because you are much more aware of what is called the digital business and knowledge and services. So I think, in a sense, if there is one unit where EOM could actually bring a lot of value, is actually this. What is the ecosystem of MGS, right? Who are the people who are actually organizations actually that impact you and you can impact, right? Where are the pain points? Okay, and how much capital do you create or destroy through your interactions? Okay, this is kind of a very simple thing actually, which is all about understanding that mutuality is all about building a reciprocal relationship, and where mutuality is more powerful than sharing or inclusive, it's because there is a moral principle behind reciprocity. Is that you establish your relationship on the basis of righteousness. Sharing, you could actually, a slave could actually be part of an inclusive economy, right? He's included, right? But just slave, right? The concept of reciprocity establishes that there is a balanced, an equilibrium in your relationship. So what is the, just as a challenge, if you think about the way you manage your relationship with the Mars unit, okay, how much balance is there in your relationship with them, right? Where is the reciprocity? Do you feel abused or do you feel abusing, right? It's just simple thing like that. And then it will actually help you identify the amount of capital you create or you destroy. And this actually is fundamentally what is behind economics of mutuality. And when you take notice of this and you measure them, then you can apply the discipline of management, because management is all about measurement. And when you manage, you improve your performance. So when you manage social capital, you improve social capital. And management is agnostic. If you ask management to make financial capital, they will make financial capital. If you ask management to make social capital, they will make social capital. It's a discipline that actually applies to multiple capitals.
Okay, thank you everyone. And I guess in terms of Mars Global Services, clearly like over the last couple of years, we have made a real intent to embed ourselves into the business, to really get closer to the customer and the people that we're working with. So I guess we're on that journey, and it's really interesting to get your insights in terms of how we can continue to progress that. I know I've got one good one around, because I was speaking to someone recently, and we always justify our business cases based on financial capital. How much are we going to get delivered? Is that really the only way that we can justify business cases going forward? Do we need to consider social, human and natural capital within those as well? Just interesting as I've been on this journey as well. So any other questions? Yes.
Thanks for the panel discussion just now. I have one question regarding the future boundary of business, because when it comes to financial capital, it's quite clear that everything is like more or less within Mars control, and the team is structured to make profit in a very effective and efficient way. When it comes to the new economy of mutuality, a lot of the capitals, like social capital or the natural capital, they're outside of the Mars control, and it requires a lot of collaboration. And how do you manage something that is you don't have a lot of control, and this more depends on leverage and collaboration, and what does a new boundary for future business draw?
Okay, so this is where we have to be very pragmatic. And when we run this ecosystem mapping, we think very freely, and we identify all potential stakeholders and pain points associated with stakeholder. And usually when we do this exercise at the level of business unit, people are very creative, and we end up with 40, 50, 60. Okay. And then we say, okay, of course, as a management, as a business, we can only tackle effectively maybe 2, 3, 4, right? And you have to identify which one actually you want to pick. And the process that we propose to our client is to say, okay, which are the ones which are really related to your purpose? So you only want to address the pain point that actually align with your purpose, and the one you can effectively, practically address through your capabilities or through the capabilities that you can tap from your ecosystem. And usually when you do this exercise, it goes back to 2 or 3. So then these 2 or 3 externalities, you consider them as your business. And this is where you're building partnership, you're building contract, you're building, but it's a very modest, in a sense, step. But if all companies start to embrace this kind of thinking, they will actually cover a much wider space than you can think of. And that's why our vision as a team is that it's about education. Education of the next generation of leaders. So, for instance, we met Shruti 2 years ago. She was an MBA student in Oxford, and she was part of our kind of a movement. And we are teaching as much as possible MBA classes, because we think the business leaders need to be equipped with this kind of thinking. But also for you, and actually with Cedric, we are running regularly executive education course just to give people tools how to do this. So again, it's a bit the story of you may just build a wall, right? Okay, and the wall may be ridiculously small, but in your mind you are building a cathedral. Okay, so start small and think big.
There's a piece that maybe Jane's about to say, but it begins with a bit of a mindset shift. And, you know, some of the question is, you know, I can hear in your question that there's a piece around, well, how do we remain in control? How do we remain the dominant actor? How do we remain our assertive self? And the big shift that I'm sure Jane was probably going to talk about was actually we need to let go of that desire to want to be the center, to want to have all the dials in front of us so that we can make all the small tweaks whenever we want. And so the language that we use is that of orchestration. So literally to draw the parallel between the conductor in front of an orchestra who doesn't play an instrument and yet remains somehow in charge of making this overall sound come alive. And so when we talk about ecosystem mapping, we're shifting that mindset from one of dominance to one of orchestration. And so to facilitate that, we use this purpose language to say, actually, I take myself out of the center and I put the purpose in the center. And it's the purpose that begins to create those boundaries around the system. And then there's a very practical grid that we use because it's still business, so you can't get away from a grid. And it's just one axis says impact, and then the x-axis says agency. and then we label the different boxes. Where you have the highest impact as a business and your highest agency, those are the three externalities that you choose to include. But as an orchestrator, you're also interested in the ones where maybe you have less agency, but have a high impact. And so you tap, the NGO on the shoulder, even your competitor on the shoulder, and you say, hey, we've done this work. We don't have the agency over this issue, but we think the impact, whether it's malnutrition or supporting cocoa farmers, you have the agency on this where we don't. How can we collaborate to make sure that this impact happens despite not having the agency to do it?
You said it so much better than I would have said it. I guess the point I wanted to make was that, well, we're talking about the economics of mutuality, and yet this isn't just about the economics of mutuality. So recent research into the global businesses that have the most sustainable performance is showing that having efficiency of scale, local responsiveness are now just prices of admission. For you to be successful going forward as a business, you have to be able to work across boundaries. And that requires us to deepen our capability, because that's not really what we've been doing. You saw from the example I said with the customer. We talk about partnership, but we haven't actually transformed how we partner. So when you take it down to a personal level of leadership, that talks about how do we, and we were talking to a team yesterday about this, how do we build trust across those boundaries? How do you build trust with people? How do you build trust with a customer that for the last 50 years you've been going into battle with? Whatever language you wrap around it, that's what you've been doing. You've been going in for a zero-sum game, whatever you say. So how do we connect more authentically with that? And the ways you do it are through two things that are really important. One is around stepping away from self-centeredness, self-interest, and holding an agenda that is not just about you. But the other is about intimacy. Intimacy is about sharing something with each other, sharing who we are, showing more of ourselves to each other. You can only build trust if you can see who someone really is. So if you do that, it will totally transform the relationships we have with any stakeholder in our business if we have the courage to do it. The courage to let go of some of that control, engage in a different sort of relationship with the hope that it will be returned in the same way. If you hold on to the idea that if I do this, I'm going to get attacked, then you will never change anything. Someone has to start and be the courageous one to step into a very different sort of relationship. So you all have relationships with stakeholders. You all have, I don't buy into the idea that it's these guys up here that have to make these decisions. We all have agency to change the nature of any relationship we have in our life.